Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Poker Distilled. This is episode number 3 of season 2, right? Isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, number 3 of season 2. I thought you were going to say number 3, like overall. And I was like, that's
We've definitely done more than 3 episodes.
totally wrong.
Yeah, we've done 20. This is the 23rd episode. And today,
Yeah.
the topic that you've brought me, Melissa, I really like it. We are going to talk about attachment in poker. And this doesn't just mean pot attachment, right? But we can be attached to so many different things. They could be real things like resources, or how much we're up for the session, or how much our bankroll is, or it could even just be some conceptual thing like a self-image of being a winner in a game or something like that. But we get attached to a lot of different shit in poker, right?
Yeah, and poker has a really harsh way of snapping that attachment, changing it, threatening it, exploiting it, making us realize that, like, actually just taking it away, I guess you could say. So I think it's interesting how poker is a game that entices you into feeling a certain sense of accomplishment, and just like you would in any other pursuit, but then snatches it away quite viciously. And that the way that you react to having that snatched away is, I think, a really important part of controlling how much you suffer in poker is number one. And then number two, not being afraid of losing things is also affects how you play. So I guess I'll start off with a kind of, I guess, like very common position that I'm sure everyone listening has been in the situation where you win a big pot, you're up on the session, things are really rosy. All of a sudden, you get that kind of the rush of endorphins or whatever you feel when you win, and you then, like, the very next hand or a couple hands later, like, you look down at a hand that it's the right hand to play. Maybe it's a raise pre, and you get 3-bet, and you suddenly realize, okay, this is going to be a big pot. This is going to be something that I'm going to have to fight for. And there's a significant chance that I could lose. And maybe my opponent is someone who's also really deep. So there's a chance that he or she could take all of my chips. And I felt this, and I'm sure I'm not alone in admitting this, but I felt this kind of feeling of like, what if I just folded here? And I could hang on to my big stack of chips, and I wouldn't have to put all of this at risk. And then I could, chill out until the next pot when I have like an easier decision. I've actually been in games before where this happened a while ago, where the player next to me was kind of like one of those players that thinks out loud. And I literally heard him say, there's easier spots, there's easier choices, there's easier decisions. I fold. And I think this can be a really big leak, and it can also be something that is, could really erode our win rate and keep us from being a winning player. And I know you and I have talked about, this was like way last season in one of our first episodes, where we talked about this kind of, wanting to like leave a session early or end a session if you're up, and be like, okay, I need to take a win. I need to just put this in the W column, and then I can go home and I can sleep well, and I don't have to worry about it till tomorrow, and how dangerous and in a lot of ways like cowardly that is. And so I think this goes to that, and it's kind of deserves, I think, its own episode.
Yeah. I think there's just so many ways that you can be attached to something in poker, but I think that's a great place to start. So let's explore the feeling of there are better spots, or I could just be in a situation that's easy where I'm taking some whales money and value betting a set. So why would I want to be in this situation? So that to me falls into the logical trap of arbitrary comparison, where you compare one thing to another thing that's not actually in danger of being mutually exclusive with that thing. Like, it's not actually in opposition with that thing that you're considering. So for example, if you say something like, I don't want to bluff this 2 overcard hand on the turn because I would rather bluff a flush draw. That's a technical example of that kind of arbitrary comparison. The question isn't actually, would you rather bluff a flush draw than bluff king queen? Like, of course, on like 8, 5 deuce, 7, you would rather have a flush draw than have king queen, but you still have to answer the question of, is it optional, mandatory, or prohibited for you to bluff king queen in this node? Do you have an exploit that you want to use? Do you have a reason to make this play, or is it better to check? What you're trying to solve there is it better to bet king queen or check king queen, or are they unclearly close or something like that? But it's easy to answer the question by grabbing something that you would clearly rather have and assigning a yes to that, and therefore a no to the thing you have. But you've actually posited a premise there that those two things are mutually exclusive, and the truth of one implies the falsehood of the other, and that's not actually what's going on. So when you're dealt a hand that you would rather not play, your brain is also playing this logical trap on itself, because it's saying, I would rather be in a spot where I just had a really good hand and was value betting and was in a really easy situation, and therefore I'm going to fold this hand, as if you've been told to choose only one of those spots, like they're mutually exclusive, but of course they're not. And the real question that we have to be answering instead is it significantly plus EV for me to play this hand? If it's actually 0 EV, or you're not sure, or it might even be a bit negative and you don't really know, and you are tired and you don't really feel like you want to play the big pot, okay, maybe I have a bit more tolerance for like folding there. But if you're actually like turning down plus EV investments just to reduce your variance, then we have an issue. I think it's good in high rate games, for example, when students are playing like 25 and L online and they have some stupid spot pre, like a fish opens, a reg calls, and they have like 7-8 suited in the small blind. And I've seen people like squeeze there because on their chart that they saw once, there was like 10% squeeze and they wanted to do it, or they rolled it or whatever. I'm like, that's just a dumb spot where the rake is higher than the chart you're looking at probably. The hand might be minus EV. The fish might be underfolding to the squeeze. It's just not a good spot. You're probably way better off calling or even folding than you are squeezing there. So in some of these environments where my students play, I do advise them not to take these super close pre-flop situations that are probably like, you know, just suckers for rake and just not very good spots. But the minute a spot is probably winning and you pass it up based on the fact that you'd rather be in a different spot that's not happening, well, that's as irrational as me saying, I'm not going to take a drink of this water because I'd rather drink a really cold, fresh glass of freshly squeezed lemonade made by my grandmother. But I don't have that right now, so it's not really relevant to me how much I want that. The choice is drink the water or not drink the water, flat the king jack to the 3-bet or don't, but don't bring into the equation the fact that you'd rather have ace king. What a ridiculous thing to do. You should be ashamed of yourself if you do that. Just kidding about the last part, but yeah.
Yeah. Do you think these feelings are signs that you're in a game that's too big for you, or you're at the wrong stake? Or do you think it's natural to feel this even if you're properly rolled and you're kind of playing at your, you know, at the appropriate level?
I think the latter. I think it's really natural to feel this. I think ego depletion is a really big thing here. So like when your willpower is low, and that can be lowered because you've been winning. Winning can destabilize you. It can fill you full of endorphins. It can make you more irrational and emotional. And it can certainly make your willpower lower than it was before and harder for you to function in your optimal way of operating, your optimal sort of wavelength. So anything can throw you off. It could be something from a sleepless night to eating too much food before the session to having a couple of drinks to not having a couple of drinks and being anxious to, I don't know, just being in a certain different brain chemical place than you are normally. I think it's perfectly natural for humans to have random fluctuation in their biology and brain chemistry that just causes some days you want to be more risk adverse than others, and that's totally normal. But I think it's a case of understanding that these feelings can happen, but they don't have to own you or control you. So it's okay to feel risk aversion. That doesn't mean that you're in over your head or you're not good enough or you're a coward. Cowardice isn't feeling risk aversion. Cowardice is acting on risk aversion when you know that it's better not to act on that risk aversion. So cowardice is saying, I don't want to flat this guy's 3-bet with king jack because I could get into a big pot. I know it's profitable to flat the 3-bet with king jack, but nevertheless, I'm going to give in to this whim. I'm going to give in to this discomfort, avoiding desire. And this is what's wrong with like massive parts of our culture these days, is that people think they should live in a world where negative feelings and discomfort and basically pain are just non-existent. You don't get to do that. You're never going to get to do that. You're a human being. You're meant to suffer at times, and it's okay to suffer for 10 seconds as you fight through the discomfort of flatting the 3-bet with King Jack, feeling the discomfort, feeling the fact that you're not going to enjoy putting the chips into the pot, yet making peace with it and saying, I'm not going to be owned by that thought process, nor am I going to identify as that thought process. Our thoughts are not us, right? They're just things that happen to us. So it's okay to have risk aversion and then say, now my challenge is to use what's left of my willpower to overcome that and choose the road of bravery and say, so what if I'm uncomfortable for 8 seconds? It's going to be, the world's going to be a better place after it. Maybe you've got to go through some kind of inward discomfort at times in order to get the right resolution, right? It's necessary.
Yeah. And that the risk aversion happens in ways that are, I think, much more subtle too. It's not just, oh, I don't want to, flat. I think your example was like King Jack here or whatever. I don't want to 3-bet it. It happens in ways where it can make you feel like the person your opponent, the villain, is a lot stronger than they appear, or it makes you feel like, I know in the CPS course, really like it. There's like a little animation. I forget what lecture it's in, but it's like an ogre with a big war hammer and like a little nerdy GTO guy. That's like,
it's like David and Goliath, right? Of the poker world.
Not that you're making fun of GTO guys, but it's like a little nerdy guy. It's like what you would imagine, like a very stereotypical nerdy.
All of the people that use poker solvers in the world, and all of the people who use the solver and don't deviate from the solver ever. Like that's what it looks like.
Or it's the guy that you imitate when you do that voice where you're like,
well, the solver says that actually I should raise here, so
yes. But it's a great visual representation of like how you can feel sometimes in a hand that is not at all based on reality and not at all based on what you're actually holding and your position and all these kinds of external factors that you normally use and incorporate to make a decision. Risk aversion can make it seem like, oh, they always have it here, or this is just a really weird spot, and I'd be foolish for calling or something like that. All of these thought processes that kind of muddy and disrupt what you normally should be thinking about. This idea of like, your normal, like you said, like it's like earlier, like, is this a mandatory bluff? Is it prohibited? Is it optional?
Yeah.
Kind of sticking to the kind of formula, if you will.
Yeah.
It can totally screw that up. And that is, I think, more so if the pot gets big and you feel invested in it. So this is related to that kind of, I guess we could call that the first part of our conversation, a kind of pre-flop risk aversion. I don't want to get involved. I haven't gotten involved yet. I haven't committed any resources yet. I don't want to commit resources. I'm going to just fold pre and kind of back away slowly and just wait for like the time when I flop a set. And that way I can keep this big, pretty stack of chips.
Yeah.
This is more, okay, now you're in the pot, it was maybe a 3-bet pot or a 4-bet pot even, and there's a lot of chips in the middle, and you've committed a lot of your own chips. And now you're in a spot on the river where, maybe we'll make it kind of a little bit more of a stark example. You have, you have value on the river and you bet and you get raised. Okay. Now, is this a spot where you just say, well, screw it, I've already committed X amount of chips and I have, I don't want to lose all of that money in the middle. I mean, look at that beautiful stack of chips. That could all be mine. And then my stack that was like this high is now going to be this high. And in my day that I thought was going to be like a 2 BB or 2 blind, big blind win day is going to be like 4. And my chart's going to look really good this month. Or do you think, well, this is like a really underbluff spot at this, at least in like live 1-2. That's what I'm using as an example.
Yeah.
So maybe my middling flush isn't so great here, or maybe the fact that the board paired should be,
Yeah.
a red flag,
Perfect
something like
example.
that.
Yeah, it's a great
And
example. Hmm.
yeah. So, and honestly, like this is, uh, I'll use myself as an example here. Last week we talked about how like I was in that spot where I had kings pre-flop and
Yeah.
my opponent,
You,
she
you
just like
slow
shoved on
rolled her
me.
really badly,
I,
and
I
which is
slow
really
rolled her.
unethical.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I got yelled at by the guy next to
Quite
me at the
rightly so.
table. Yeah. They're always right to yell at me, but it didn't matter because I won the pot. So at the end I was the one laughing. But the, but that's like me and like my A game, I guess you could say, or something close to my A game. But like when I'm down two or three buy-ins, when it's been a really rough day, and I've been card dead, and I finally get something that looks like it's going to be profitable, that it's going to turn something around, and then I get into this absolute fortune reversal spot on the river, being able to say, yes, I've committed a lot. There's a lot of money in there. If I fold, I'm going to lose all of that, and it's going to be, instead of losing two buy-ins, it's going to be losing four buy-ins. But this is just under bluff, and this is the wrong call.
Yeah. So you're saying lots of things that I want to come back and add stuff to. So let me come in before I forget all the stuff that I'd sort of built up in my head there up until this point. So to bring this back to attachment, I would put it to you that there are three different types of attachment going on in this story that we've painted. So the story is that the hand begins with some holding that you want to fold, but actually you should 3-bet in theory, and you experience an attachment to two things at that point. So I think firstly, you experience an attachment to your chip stack that you've built up throughout the session and what it means to you and the emotions associated with it and the dopamine it's given you and all of that. And then secondly, I think you experience an attachment to a kind of faux safety net that you've created, a fortress, if you will, that you've built around yourself, by which you've kind of said, the status quo is now that I am up 5 buy-ins, and it's now safely going to be the case that I am up big this session, and you've kind of created this fortress. And then the thought that you could get involved with another person that has like 400, 500 big blinds is terrifying, because it actually means leaving that fortress. Like, we do erect that fortress whether we like it or not. When we're up big, we kind of tell ourselves the narrative that this can now only be like a winning session of like quite severe magnitude, and it feels unsafe to actually move away from that reality. So I think there's two types of attachment that we need to fight through right from the beginning: the attachment to the resources we've accumulated, and the attachment to the aura of safety that we've actually built around ourselves, by winning those resources. Then when we move on to like the fortune reversal river spot that you're talking about, where we value bet the mediocre flush on the river, there's a 3 flush board, we make a normal value bet, we get raised big, and we have this fork in the road. And really what the fork in the road comes down to is, are we willing to be brave enough to see truth, to see reality for what it is? Or are we going to perish under the pressing weight of our desires and our type 2 thought process that refuses to accept fortune reversal? And the answer is very often that we're going to crumble, and we're going to go ahead and make the crying call, because the attachment is now too great. We've just expended willpower by resisting the attachment to the safety net that we've built up in our head by getting involved in the pot in the first place. We've then expended more willpower by saying goodbye to a bunch of our chips temporarily by putting them into the pot, even though we'd rather have hoarded them. Now we don't have a lot of willpower left, and now poker is saying, hey, you know how you've just gone through something really quite challenging and your willpower has been drained? Well, how about you drain the tank here fully? One last time you do the right thing, even though you're fucking emotionally and mentally destroyed by this point, and you've got like 1 minute to wrap your head around fortune reversal and quote unquote do the right thing. So maybe it's not as simple as a choice between outcomes, the choice between choosing to fold in an underbluff spot and choosing to punt off the rest of your stack in an underbluff spot. Maybe it's a choice between, do you want to like literally empty the tank of mental resource and energy and willpower? Do you want to basically get up one last time and stagger over that finish line and maximize your EV for that hand fully? You've done a good job by getting involved when you didn't want to and leaving your fortress behind. will you now really just go all in, and not physically, but all in emotionally and mentally, in the sense that you're going to do the right thing, even though you really find it very daunting and a lot of emotional weight is pulling you in the other direction. So sometimes it's not a choice. Sometimes it's just, I have nothing left and I don't have the strength to fight these demons and I'm going to get swallowed up by them. And that's what normally happens there. So where do we go from here? Like, does it help us maybe if we say, I'm experiencing attachment? Maybe if we list all the different things we can actually be attached to in poker, and we say, it's not just chips or money. That's a really shallow way to put it. It's a sense of progress. I'm attached to my progress in the session. I'm attached to having a good sleep tonight with warm, fuzzy thoughts of winning and images of big chip towers towering up into the lights on the ceiling of the casino. I am attached to my self-worth growing. I'm attached to that graph that I'm going to look at the end of the month. I'm attached to feeling like I'm going somewhere in my poker career, in light of the fact that I've run good and was up 5 buy-ins earlier. If we accept that we have all that multitude, that plethora of attachment, it might make more sense why it's so damn hard to actually see the truth in that hand, where if our buddy showed it to us and was like, hey man, should I call the river here? I'd be like, no, this is a really underbluff spot, and so would you. But when we're the one in the hot seat and we have the crippling weight of our emotional attachments on top of us there, maybe it's not so easy to just choose the logical path, because it's hard to reach logic. I see, like, you know, logic is this, like, it's there somewhere and it's this sort of safety cord that you can grab onto that can save you, but when there are that many demons like obscuring your vision, you're like fumbling around for it in the dark. You know, if the light was on and there were no demons, okay, I'll just pull the cord, no problem. But when it's you in the hot seat, the light's off and the demons and the shadows are everywhere, and you know, you need to fight through them first before you can get to logic.
Yeah, I think this is really the key question, because we want to see progress, because as human beings, I think it's difficult to convince ourselves to continue to do something that doesn't seem to be resulting in progress. So, you know, maybe you could say something like, yeah, I've had like 3 awful months in a row. I'm on a terrible downswing, but like, I'm a lot better of a person for it. Or like, I'm you know, I've gotten, you know, my willpower is stronger than ever, or whatever. And I think there's something to be said for that. But I think the kind of like way that I think about it, and maybe somewhat of a solution, is redefining what progress is. So saying like, yeah, it's really nice to be able to have a graph that if I were to show someone who doesn't play poker, doesn't understand poker, they would say, wow, you're really good. Like, look at your graph. It just goes up and up and up. And yeah, you have, you know, you're winning 9 BBs or whatever. And you're like, you know, you're just crushing. Yeah, that's progress in a sense, I think. And that maybe is an indication that you're beating the game and that you're a winning player over, I guess, a large enough sample. But there's always, like, what makes poker fascinating is that, like, if, at least for me, like, if I just won all the time, it'd be so boring. And what makes it fascinating is, like, as soon as you accomplish something, it reminds you of something else that you don't have, or it strikes at a weakness that you didn't know you possess. So maybe, like you said earlier, you are on an upswing and you're sun running and you start to establish these little bad habits, and you become less risk adverse in spots where you should be a little bit more risk adverse, or you, instead of going through, you know, the proper thought process, you're investing haphazardly because the last 10 times you invested, you were rewarded. And so, of course, your brain's going to tell you this is a good investment. Something, you know, that recently happened to me is, you know, I had a really good session on Friday night when I played, and it was a bigger game, and I played really well, and I came away, you know, winning a bunch. And the next day I played in a 1-2 game, and I just got like whacked because I brought the energy from the 5-5-10 game to the 1-10 game. I mean, to the 1-2 game. And this sounds like a little bit like a new age kind of thing, but I think like every game has its own kind of like energy, and you have to be aware of that. And if you bring the wrong energy to that game, then you can't vibe with it. So it's like wearing the wrong outfit to a function. It's like you're just not going to fit in, and that I don't think is a good thing, and it can cause you to kind of play in a way that doesn't match the game that you're in. And so all of this, I think, is a long way of saying that when we talk about progress in poker, and we look at like, why are we being so attached? Why do we get attached? I think it's because we want to see progress. We don't want to we don't want to believe that we're regressing. But at the same time, I think it's because we have a definition of progress that is very stereotypical and is very much based in like a non-poker definition of progress, to where poker is going to tell you, well, your graph may look like shit, but you're playing really well, or you're playing better than ever. And so for me, it was like, I played really well in one game. The next day I played terrible, and my graph represented that. But it wasn't necessarily because I was regressing. It was because, there were external things that happened that were kind of outside of my control. I wasn't in the right game, and et cetera, et cetera. So anyways, I'm rambling, but I think you get what I'm saying.
Yeah. I'm interested to hear more about this wrong energy kind of idea. Like, what do you mean by that phrase? Like, what were you doing? Like, what did the bad, or maybe not the bad energy, but the wrong type of energy for the game, what did that cause you to do at the poker table that you thought constituted suboptimal play, shall we say?
I think it caused me to not understand the amount of money in the pot versus like what players were actually like used to playing with. So for instance, like someone bets out 75% pot, in a 1-2 game, maybe that's like $40 or $45. Seeing that as $45 and not seeing it as 75% pot and what that means.
Right. Okay.
So in other words, seeing it as like, well, $45, that was like an open in the game last night.
Yeah.
And just like still being in this like attachment. So like we talk about attachment, like another form of it is like you're still playing the game that you were in the night before.
Yeah.
So like you're still attached to a certain world that is no longer real and existing. And so your brain reacts to it as like in a real kind of like, lizard brain way. It's like, oh, it's only $45. Like, whatever. It's like, no, it's 75% pot. So like, what does that mean for your equity? Like all of these things, not just $45, not a big pot. I call like really standard, like, lizard brain stuff that, whereas if like I'm used to playing a stake, then I'm like, okay, 75% pot. I got to think about it differently.
Yeah. It's almost like you've got, I don't know.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's like you've got a weight attached to one of your wrists, and you're having to like do things throughout the day, and then it suddenly gets taken off, and your arm's just like flying all over the place because you're used to like that resistance being there. You're just in a mode, like, and you're still attached. Even if there's no like positivity or negativity to the attachment, your brain is just like sluggishly unable to like, rub its eyes and adjust to the light, as it were. So yeah, that definitely happens. Like, see, when you've been losing a lot, that happens. You're actually attached to losing. You're attached to like the feeling of losing in a way where it becomes almost inevitable. You probably felt like during your big downswing that you talk about at the start of the year, you probably felt at times that there was no escape from it. Like, it was inevitable. There was a sense of just like it was going to happen. There was nothing that you could do. And that's like, you're attached to the role of the victim. You're unwilling to let go of the self-image of yourself as the victim, because that's what you would jump to in life if you were being persecuted. Like, if someone was taking your lunch money every day at school, you would feel like a victim. It would be the correct appropriation of the spot, right? It would be to like, I'm being victimized by the bully that's taking my lunch money. So I think this is a really cool idea, that we get attached not just to like physical things, or not even to just good things that we want, not just like progress or a graph or a bankroll or the pot or the chips or the towers we're building with them, but we also just get attached to realities that were once the case and maybe aren't anymore. And we do this subconsciously, and we do this in life as well, right? Like, we live our lives as if we're still children sometimes. Like, I remember like talking through some stuff with my therapist a couple of years ago and realizing that like many of the ways I lived my life were just like continuations of childhood. It's just like the brain is attached to childhood and what that was like, and it's just rerunning all of these things over and over again. So yeah, we're so habitual, right? Like we really do just get locked into the sort of paradigm of the world as it was at one point, and then we find it hard to adjust. We even do this genetically. Like I'm going to go on a huge like rant here. You know, I'm really going like full Peterson here. I'm going to get biblical in a minute. And I put it to you. How about this? Eh? I'm going to give you a theory, and you can tell me what you think about that, perhaps. Eh? And I'm going to do that. So what if...
You got to put on your suit. You got to wear a really nice suit.
I don't have any. I have one suit, and I bought it because I was at a bridge tournament with my girlfriend, and I didn't realize there was a gala dinner that night, and I went to the local tailor and got this brown old man coffee suit. It looks like it's had coffee poured all over it, actually. It's that kind of old man coffee suit, and I wore this. It's like my one suit I have. Now I've got a couple of suit jackets, actually, but anyways, what if I put this to you, right? What if we said that human beings are just permanently attached to the way things were while they were doing the most adapting, right? So this is my theory. So what if we are like completely attached to the prehistoric times, because that's when, that was like a 50 million year, I don't know, period. Okay, that's probably too much, but let's say there was a long period of time where Homo sapiens were evolving. Let's say it was like 50,000 years before the year 1 AD, right? From then onwards. And that's a hell of a long time to evolve, right? And to like experience a certain world and be reacting to the fact that you're a hunter-gatherer in a tribe of hunter-gatherers eating berries and killing animals and sleeping rough and traveling around your local area and like trading with other bands of people and stuff like that. And then like how long have we had electricity, for example? Well, we've had electricity for like a couple of 100 years or something like that, 150 years, 200 years, I don't know, something like that. That's not very long at all. Not a lot of evolution has happened. Genetics haven't really changed in that time. Well, how long have we had online poker? Since like 2004. That's like 19 years. That's really no time whatsoever. How long have you played online poker, Melissa, right? How long have you played poker? A couple of years. So you get the point. So what if we are like always attached to the period that constituted the longest amount of time in which we had to sort of like survive and be successful? And like we're finding in this day and age that with technology, it's not actually making us happier, it's making us sadder, right? Like the advent of technology in many ways, not all technology, but a lot of technology is making us lonely, sad, depressed, suicidal. Like all these rates are increasing, not decreasing, even though on the surface comfort and luxury and everything is getting better. We're suffering less physically than we ever have in the past, but we're suffering more mentally. And I think it's this lack of sort of immersion. It's the fact that like we've evolved to be one way and the world is just so completely different because we are, our genetics are attached to the environment as it was when they were evolving, when they were adapting themselves to be optimal. And I think you can trace this all the way back and all the way forward. So then when you have the poker player that's just like, I have been losing, that's a long amount of time. Let's say you've been losing for like a month and a half. Like, you're completely conditioned. You've now adapted and evolved to that 6-week stretch, and you can't snap out of that for one session. You can't be like, well, for the next 4 hours, I need to act as if that's not happened. It's almost like we're powerless. So I feel like the attachments we form we're kind of slaves to the longest amount of time that things have been happening for. Childhood is long compared to like us having this conversation right now. Our evolution was hellishly long. It was like 50,000, 100,000, however many years of like of that happening. What if we are just like way less versatile than we think? What if we just have a massive challenge to overcome, and that it's just hard for us to like get used to a new situation when there's been significant exposure to an old one? What if we just really struggle with that as a species?
Yeah. I think that sounds right to me in a lot of ways. Is that, I mean, I don't know enough about like evolutionary theory to
just pretend you do. That's what I did. It's fine.
Yeah, I know. It works though. It sounds so good. So
making stuff up.
You convinced me. Where do I sign up? Take my money.
Yep. Carrotcorner.com.
You're on Daily Wire. You're on Daily Wire, right? Let me get my subscription.
/carrotcorner.com/carrot poker school full scholarship.
From now on, Carrot Corner will be a partner with Daily Wire. Now,
it's probably not a good idea.
Just kidding. Just kidding. Not going to happen. Everyone can. Um, I think that there's a lot of truth in that when it comes to, I think, like protecting ourselves from getting hurt again, like in the future. So it's like you rely on this conditioning of like, I've been losing, so therefore I'm going to continue to lose. And that way I'm going to suffer less when I do lose. I think it's more of a kind of a way of protecting ourselves from, suffering. So much of what we do in poker, I think, is like protecting ourselves from suffering, and that is natural. But I think in order to be good at poker, we have to act unnaturally, and we have to force ourselves to react against or act, I think, against that those like evolutionary impulses of like, this is how things have been going, so therefore they're going to continue in the future. This is what we've learned to adapt to, so therefore we're going to adapt to it in this way. I think it's true what you said in terms of like we only know how to adapt to what we've experienced before, but I think every once in a while, like, yeah, you'll have a session or something will come up that you haven't really quote unquote experienced before. But normally, like most things you go through, I think as a poker player, like you've been in that spot before. So like you've experienced, at least for me, I think like most things I've experienced, like I'm experiencing for like a second or third or fourth time. And so I know I have the tools to deal with them. It's just a matter of accessing those tools. And it's a matter of using those tools and digging them up when I don't want to, or I know it's going to be difficult. So, swinging in a session between like having like a lot of chips to having, to being down, to being up again, to being down, like all of that is something that doesn't feel that abnormal. I think when you do experience something abnormal, you do have the tools, you just don't know that you do, and it's harder to access them. So, and this is not to say that like something can happen. I'm sure there's something that can happen that is like you've never experienced before and causes you to have some kind of total breakdown, I guess. But for the most part, I think we as human beings are incredibly resilient. And I don't think that we give ourselves enough credit for what we can endure and survive and thrive from. I was reading a book a while ago about it might have actually just been an article, but it was about someone that had been diagnosed with ALS, which is like probably the worst thing you could be diagnosed with, I think.
Yep.
I don't know. I think it's pretty much the worst because you just basically like you're given like a couple of years and the doctors are like, you're going to get locked into your own body.
Yep. Your
brain is going to continue to function perfectly, but you're going to have no movement and you're not going to be able to do anything. And then you're going to die. And
I mean, you might earn like a bunch of Nobel Prizes and write like 11 books before that happens if you're really lucky, but that seems like
Stephen Hawking,
seems like a rare occurrence.
The one variant of that disease that allowed him to, that's a really interesting case of like, he's like the only person, maybe not the only person, but one of the few people that's ever had ALS and lived that long and been able to function. But anyways, so this person was saying how the shock of it is the most difficult part, but what is amazing is the way that your mind adapts to it. So like you just accept it as your new reality. So it's no longer like, oh, look at all these people who don't have ALS. It's like, no, this is my world. So just like our world that we're in, we can't imagine a world where like, it lasts for, instead of having like a 24-hour day, it's like a 40-hour day or something. Like we can't imagine that because we don't know it. It's not what our reality is. We're just accustomed to it. If all of a sudden it was like, oh, by the way, like we're gonna have a 48-hour day, everyone would freak out.
We want to reject that, right? We want to reject the thing that, even if it's not objectively bad, we want to reject it because we're attached to the normality and the reality as it is. Yet, like that ability to adapt to things that are long-term, like having ALS, having a diagnosis of ALS or something, is a strength But then in poker, because poker's the alien world that, you know, I call it in poker therapy, when we're in that hand and we're attached to the status quo of the winning session and all of the other things we're attached to, that strength, that thing that keeps us going when we're diagnosed with ALS or some horrible thing like that happens, the thing that's there to actually make that bearable is the thing that hijacks us in these little microcosms of time that are poker nodes and poker hands. So there's something about time here and how the brain is getting confused about how to compute longer and shorter periods of time with this sort of adaptation mechanism. It's sort of misfiring across certain microcosms of time or something like that.
Right. And I think we have an incredible ability to adapt as human beings. I just think we do. And I think we can adapt in ways that we don't even realize are possible. And I think we can do it a lot quicker than we realize. If you think about like a situation, like recently, this awful wildfire in Maui that's been in the news, it's what's interesting about a situation like that. And it's not just the Maui wildfire, just thinking about that, but like 9/11 or some other situation where it's like this just sudden disaster. It's amazing the stories that come out of what people are capable of doing in that disaster when like they're faced with this sudden terrible change of circumstances.
Yep.
So like the stories in Maui of people being, you know, dragging people out of their cars and like running over to the water and like hiding in the ocean to protect themselves from the wildfire. And this also gets into a really interesting theory of like a lot of progressives feel like the government needs to be, you know, needs to be there to like help in those kind of situations when in reality people react on their own much better and much quicker and much more efficiently than any kind of like overarching you know, kind of government structure. And we've seen that proven again and again and again. People are incredibly resourceful when they're when like they're in a threatening situation.
Right.
Bringing this back to poker, I think that we can be incredibly resourceful when we are faced with, you know, this kind of having what we are attached to taken away from us. So I think it's fine and appropriate to grieve, and I think grief is an appropriate term.
It's
like,
part of adapting, isn't it? It's the first
part of adapting.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like if you've ever lost a loved one, if you've ever gone through any kind of a situation like that, you know that grief is super intense and it could last a long time, but eventually you adapt. And my father passed away in 2015, and it was like awful for like 6 months. And it still is awful every once in a while. Like you still think about it and it's very difficult, but I've adapted to a world where he is no longer alive.
Yeah.
And that to me, it hasn't like, you know, it's not something that has like ruined my life, as weird as that is to say. But I think that's
it doesn't
say this, I think
it doesn't ruin people's lives, because if you look at all of the 75-year-olds in the world, not many of them have parents still alive, and many of them would say their lives are not ruined. So the you could almost go as far to say that human beings necessarily adapt to cope with the death of their parents and their loved ones, because these are just inevitable things. And if we didn't, we would be way worse off and we wouldn't be as successful as a species. It would get in the way of us being productive and making children and doing other things that we're supposed to do to keep the species going. So yeah, totally. Now, how do we then bring that back to poker? How do we get that same level? Because there's so many parts that went into that, Melissa, right? Like let's stick with the example of you losing your father just for a second, because you brought it up, if that's okay with you. There were loads of different stages you had to go through, right? I'd imagine I've not lost a parent, and I've lost grandparents and stuff like that, but no one I've been lucky enough not to lose someone I'm really close to at any point. So maybe I don't understand this fully, but I would guess that there's a period of shock. I'd guess there's a period of numbness at some point. I'd guess there's a period of grief. I'd guess there's a period of depression. And then I'd guess that like that all starts to turn into the adaptation, right? But that took months and months and months and months, right? So for the poker player who's trying to adapt to, let's say, fortune reversal, clearly it's not analogous to like, you know, somebody losing a loved one or anything like that. But does it still have similar stages? Does it still have a stage of shock? And do we need to feel that shock and go through that shock? Do we then need to feel a bit of grief? And do we then need to feel a bit sad? And do we then need to finally reach acceptance? And maybe we need to take all of this, compact it and condense it into 30 seconds and actually become adaptation machines that are almost going through all these stages really quickly, so that in order that we may fold that mediocre flush to that raise on the river.
Think about, I love that adaptation machine. Think about how powerful that is. Think about how powerful if you were just going through a world that is constantly changing and constantly saying, you're comfortable, now you're going to be uncomfortable. What you got used to as your reality is not going to be your reality anymore. That person that you got really attached to, that big stack of chips in front of you, gone. Okay. But how powerful would it be if you just said, okay, I acknowledge, like, I'm going to grieve it. I'm going to grieve it. I'm going to be numb. I'm going to be sad. And then I'm going to be fine, or not fine, but I'm going to adapt to this new world. So that world that was like me being up for buy-ins is no longer the world. That world that had my loved one in it that I saw and was very close to is no longer my world. And that is, I think, obviously using the death of a loved one is like an extreme polar kind of example. But I do think this attachment, and especially the attachment to winning and chips and etc., triggers the same emotions. And I don't think it's wrong to say that we grieve.
It's a different scale, but we're talking about how humans cope with adversity, and we have a mechanism to do that. And anyone who wants to object at this point and say, I can't believe he would use the death of her father to illustrate a poker concept, is entirely missing the point of our discussion, which is that we're trying to pinpoint the process that human beings go through to cope with horrendous things. And yeah, in poker, it's not as big a deal. Of course it's not. We're not saying for a second that there's any parallel magnitude-wise between those two things. But because we're humans, we still have one and only one blueprint for coping with adversity, and it would be better to use that same blueprint that we use in real life strife and at the poker table than it would be to like oppress it and deny it and just be like, nah, you're just meant to be fine, bro. Toughen up, bro. You're meant to be fine. Man up, bruh. Like, do we want to do that? And we want to say, let's not go through the essential stages of coping with fortune reversal? No, I think we want to go through the blueprint for a human. It's like, you're a human. Humans use the blueprint for coping with adversity that contains these 4 stages or whatever. You should use that blueprint, regardless of whether we're talking about a minor adversity or a life catastrophe. It's still the same blueprint with different magnitude, right?
Absolutely. And also, too, like if you had, we don't even have to use the example of like death. Like if you had a friend, for instance, a friend that you cared about that went through a breakup, you know, with a partner, and it was like, you know, 2 weeks and you're like, okay, like you have a lot of sympathy for them. Maybe you're going over there a lot. You're trying to hang out. You're trying to get them out of the house. You're trying to kind of get them to like get back to normal. Well, you're going to expect that in the first 2 weeks or 3 weeks after the breakup, maybe longer if it's been a longer relationship. But like, if it's been like 4 years and that person's like, I just can't date again. I can't put myself back out there.
Now you're pissed off at them. You have like a bit of disdain for them, don't you? You're like, you failed. Like, you have failed at using the blueprint that everyone else is meant to use. You're not a good human. I'm mad at you. I need to make you into a good human now by showing anger. Yeah,
exactly. And this is the contempt we feel, I think, you know, when people, you know, kind of go on and on about bad beats, or like, you know, the classic OMC who sits down at the table and starts talking about how he, you know, his opponent hit a 1-outer in like some tournament 6 years ago. And you're like, you know, like, you're just like, oh my God, like save me now. And I think this is that same contempt, contempt that we feel for that OMC is the same contempt that we would have for a loved one that like can't snap out of it and is still pining over that person that has left them a year ago, or even like, I mean, there's situations where people have lost loved ones and you're just like, look, I know you're really close to your mom, I know you're really close to your father, but like you're killing yourself. Like you have to get back into life, or else you'll never recover from this. This is very common, I think, with older couples when like one spouse dies and the other spouse is like, we've been married for 40 years. I have no idea how to function without this person in my life.
They die like pretty quickly, right? They give up.
Yeah, right, exactly. And so we don't want to be that way. We don't have to be that way. And getting back to this kind of adaptability machine, I'm thinking of like the example of like maybe like a video game, like a character in a video game that's like facing like new levels or new, you know, the world is constantly switching and they just have new enemies and, you know, all of these different situations, and like
stuff that worked previously no longer works, right?
No longer works. Like that really great weapon that you had is like useless in this new world. And I just feel like it's exciting to think about the power and how good of a poker player I could be if I could be like have that be like that adaptability machine. Like think about that. So and you're not doing it and saying, I just lost a big pot, I'm stoic, I don't feel anything.
That's disingenuous. But that's
disingenuous.
That's the advice you get often, right? And in sports psychology and in poker, I see that everywhere. It's like, well, my last coach just told me to like not do that. It's like, oh, great. That's fantastic fucking coaching. Your last coach told you to not get upset when you lose. Oh, it's so brilliant. If only you'd thought of that yourself, you know, you'd have been fine. So yeah, you have to feel shit emotions. Like you don't get to choose, but you do get to choose what to do next. So what if maybe we could prompt ourselves to enter into the mode of adaptability, dealing with processing adversity machine. Let's call it the adversity processor, the AP. So how do we become the AP? What if we had a prompt? You know, when you like tell your computer to do something, you give it a prompt. You're in MS-DOS, you like do this, or you click like a button, it does this. What if we just need a prompt in the operating system of our brain? And what if that prompt is just like, go through the stages? What if that's our prompt? Like it happens, the river comes, we bet, we get raised, our brain goes, adversity. And we're like, good. That's the first fucking step. You've identified that it is adversity. Now you can become the adversity processor. Okay, what's step one? Okay, be a little bit surprised and shocked. Be, yeah. Maybe is it shock and then grief, or is it grief and then this? Is it disbelief then grief?
Oh yeah, maybe. I think shock is probably the first one.
Shock, disbelief, then all the other ones, right? So let's get shocked first. That's okay. Let's take a minute to be a rabbit in the headlights, but let's not fucking act when we're in that stage. Let's not act while we are a rabbit in the headlights. They run towards the car. You know? That's why they get squished on the side of the road. So let's not do that. Let's not run towards the car just because we're blinded by it. Then we'll move into the stage of processing the loss. You would just value betting a hand with 88% equity, and now your hand might have like 17% equity, and the pot's bigger, and you can't even match the next bet of your opponent. You can't even call that raise. So let's process the fact that regardless of whether you call the raise, your equity is plummeted. Let's mourn that equity. Let's grieve the fact that your 88% pot entitlement is now 17 or something. Let's mourn that. Okay, so you've mourned that, you feel sad. Good. You should feel sad. That's great that you're suffering, because you're going to need to suffer in order to get to the point where you can do the right thing and actually prosper here and find a courageous resolution. So if you don't suffer, you're not going through the processing of the adversity, and you're not going to get to the right outcome. People who are like, I'm just going to like call and not care about that and hope I win. You've rejected suffering because you can't handle it. But if you just accepted a bit of suffering, you wouldn't be suffering nearly as much long term as you are, and you wouldn't be stuck at 1, 2, or 5 NL online. Because you'd have accepted a bit of suffering when it's appropriate to do so, in order that you don't have to perpetually suffer and be, you know, someone who is considered a failure by yourself. So let's suffer, feel sad, but now it's time to move on with life. So then we get to acceptance, and then we get to resolution. But resolution can only come after we've suffered a bit and accepted the new reality. And now we can fold, and now we've made the right choice. Yeah. That's courageous. Courage is not suffering. It's not saying, no, I'm too strong to suffer. That's not courage. That's just like bravado and lunacy and delusion. That's delusion. Courage is saying, I have to suffer because it's the human condition. I'm going to suffer because adversity has just happened. I'm going to suffer because I have 9% EV with a flush now. And now that I've done that, I can actually think clearly again. So let's process. Yeah.
I'm thinking about like a way like how funny it would be, and maybe like frame it like as how like ridiculous it would be if like I during the main event, I forget his name, but there was a player that was like the chip leader. He was on TV a lot, and he just had this shirt on. He was a bigger guy, but it said Stoic, and it was like a brand, like he was like advertising. It's just like, and he was interviewed where he said like, I just try and be like a Stoic in certain pots, like I don't try and show emotion, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm sure that works for him, but think about like how funny and ridiculous it would be if like you showed up to like speak at like your parents' funeral and like you had like a shirt on that said Stoic, and you're just,
Oh my God.
you're just like, I feel nothing. Like this is nothing. Like this is just variance. This is
Oh my God. Yeah, that's a really good reductio ad absurdum though, because you're basically
It is,
taking,
yeah.
you're using the big stage as a magnifying glass for the small stage, and you're basically saying if it's right for humans to just be stoic come what may, even if they don't have the skill set to be, like maybe someone who's really good at stoicism has practiced it so much that they legitimately can just like level out all of their responses and emotions in cases like that. And maybe it's not appropriate to do it at the parents' funeral, and maybe they wouldn't there, but we can take out that absurdity of behaving in that way and look at the poker hand now and be like, well, for someone who can't just do that, pretending you can and trying to, like, if you're the sort of person in the amphitheater of your own brain there, and there's other versions of yourself watching you do that, those people are going to be like, well, this is wrong, this is like lunacy, like you're going to see yourself as a bit of an idiot in that moment for pretending that you're not feeling the way that you're feeling. So for most people, stoicism like that, unless they've practiced it and they know a ton about it, I'd imagine it's something that you've got to like really put a load of work into to get good at. You don't have the option of just being like, oh no, I'm going to be stoic. Like, unless you are a stoic, you don't have the option of just saying, I'm going to be stoic. So you have to go through the motions of how humans process adversity. Otherwise, you're just going to behave like an imbecile. Like, that's it. You're going to be a lunatic, or you're going to go through the motions. You've got two choices, and one's better than the other.
And you're not going to be, you're not going to know yourself. Like, I know myself to know that I'm not a stoic. I feel things in a very intense way. I'm, like, overly sensitive to what's happening around me. I feel things very intensely, and not to say that other people don't, but for me at least, I'm not that way. I can't be like, no emotion, things hurt, and I sometimes express that, and I can't help it, but it's also not a bad thing. It's who I am, and I kind of embrace it. And so the reason I like this adaptability model is because it's more honest. It's a more honest way to be true to myself, to say, okay, I'm going to experience shock, numbness, grief, depression, sadness, and then be okay, because I can't shortcut that. I can't just go to, I'm going to be okay. This may be, well, no, I don't think it's an oversimplification, but I think most people are like that. I think most poker players are like that. Maybe there's, I think, the few who are, committed to stoicism or have some kind of method and they're able to do that. But I don't think most people are. And I would even venture to say that that wouldn't work for most people.
Even if they tried, like, they would fail on that pursuit. You could say that they're just not wired to ever be able to do it. But maybe Stoics will disagree. I'm pretty sure that there'll be a few people that are into stoicism listening to this, and I'm sure that they're going to comment on YouTube and be like, no, actually, you guys don't understand stoicism or something like that. So I'll be intrigued to hear that, because I don't know a lot about it. So feel free, if you are into stoicism.
And I would love to hear someone's response to, like, Bertrand Russell. His criticism of stoicism is that, like, it essentially is absurd when you boil it down, because if the obstacle is the way, if we derive, growth out of suffering, why not just suffer all the time? So what's the whole point of growing? Period. It's like, it reduces, like, Bertrand Russell's, like, criticism of it was like, it reduces itself to a sense of,
it's no longer bad.
Really, it's no longer bad. Like, you lose any kind of sense of what's polar. You lose any kind of sense of understanding at its essence whether something is good or bad, and at its core, it can destroy any kind of sense of moral right and wrong. And so he was very, I think he had a pretty interesting criticism of it, and I think that And that's not to say it's not useful. And it's not to say that it's not an interesting philosophy, but I've never read a response to it that makes me, that I feel is like, can meet Bertrand Russell's criticism of it.
I've
So
never
I would
read
love to hear
anything that
something.
can ever meet anything Bertrand Russell has ever said. Like, he is literally infallible as far as philosophers go. He's extremely good, and he's definitely like my favorite philosopher, because he's just constantly on the money with absolutely everything, and he's just like absolutely like vicious and lethal with the bluntness of like everything as well. So big Russell fan. Big Russell fan. Yep.
Good. Oh, I'm glad. I didn't know that. That's cool.
Anyway.
All right. Well, this was a good discussion. I'm really glad that I feel like it was really interesting to kind of reach this end point of like the adaptability model. I think that's a really interesting.
I love it. I think it's such a revelation that like we can make a condensed rapid fire version of some kind of coping with real life adversity model and execute it in the 30-second little time window of a hand. Like that to me is like some kind of, I don't know if I'm just drunk on the philosophy. I used to get this way where I was writing essays like in university, where I'd come up with some take on something I was writing about, and I would get like drunk on it, and I'd be like, this is so fucking good. I'd be writing the essay, and then the lecturer just put like a question mark next to it because I was so drunk on it. I didn't even like explain it clearly, and no one knew what I was actually talking about. And that might be happening here, but I'm getting that same feeling that like this is like a really cool idea that we can like prompt ourselves to switch into this mode where we like execute those steps to process it. I just love that. Yeah,
I love it. I love it. I love it. Yeah, it is great, and it is something that, again, like I think of it like as a really powerful tool, and I can't wait to yield it. I can't wait to try it out. Like I think it's really cool. So
all right, I don't know if I have any trolley experiences from this week. I don't think I was really trolled much.
I have an annoying live player story. This happened in that game I played on Friday night where I just got to a river spot where I felt like it was a mandatory bluff spot, and I fired off like a pot-sized bluff, and my opponent, who seemed like he was fairly inexperienced, but not only did he think out loud, but he did the whole thing where he counted out the combos that I could possibly have out loud, and then like went through like the whole like, okay, you could this, blah 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 blah, but that. And the previous hand, I had like checked. I had slow played a set out of position, and he was just like, "But you slow played a set out of position." Da, 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 da. And meanwhile, I'm just sitting there with this bluff, like just like hanging out there, and I'm just like, "Oh my god! Like, just call, like please, just do it,
Put me out of my misery at least,
like,
yeah."
It's just like, yeah, it was just, and it was funny because had he just sat there and just not said anything, I would have like thought I had a decent shot that he would fold, or I don't know, I just would have felt better about it. But like, and he was right next to me, and like listening to him just think out loud and go through the whole process. And as I'm listening to it, I'm just like, I'm trying to bluff like someone that's just like a real overthinker. And I just wanted to be like, dude, it's like a favorable world for me. Like, come on.
Yeah, like range EV is 56%, showdown value is less than 1%,
like,
therefore
we don't have to do this.
Yeah,
like,
start putting on the nerd voice.
You're common. Yeah, you like, I know you've seen a lot of like things, like a lot of videos online where people list off the combos and everything, and then he's just like, call.
Yeah, maybe that's the time to just say something completely like out of left field, like we talked about before. Like when he's like, "Oh yeah, you slow play before. You're probably bluffing this time." You could just be like something like, "You want to bet I'm bluffing? You want to bet that I'm bluffing? Like you actually gonna put your money where your mouth is? Then you think I'm bluffing? Like who's gonna call you after that? Like that's no one that's bluffing says that, right?
Right.
No, that'll work.
It'd be funny if I said, if he was like, "Oh well, you have like 7 combos," and I was like, well, I have 8 combos of that.
Yeah, I actually have 8 combos. I have 8.3 combos of sets here because I mix 5s at 43% frequency. Anyway, almost out of time, so I guess I thought I would load up the YouTube comments on my phone, and I have a couple of trolley looking ones. Lots of lovely comments people have been saying.
Is this from from one of your video, like your videos, or is it from?
Yeah, so it's just like this
itself?
feed. This feed is just comments on any YouTube video that I've ever put out,
Oh,
just
okay.
in like most
Okay.
recent. So 5 hours ago, Costanikas3881 says, "What's with the accent / monotone voice?" Deeply hurt by this. I'm just gonna disbelief. Okay. Shock. Okay. Yep. Grieving the fact I have a monotone voice and a silly accent. Now acceptance. I have accepted that I have. Okay, I've processed it. Good. That was good. At least I didn't pretend that I wasn't hurt by it. Yeah.
Right. And you didn't lash out.
I didn't lash out.
Yeah, it is. I always thought it was weird that you put on that accent, seeing that you live in California.
So, I know. I mean, everyone lives in America,
strange.
though. There aren't any people outside of America, right? Everyone lives in California. So I obviously also live in California, and I just put on a semi-Scottish accent. Why are tens called potatoes? Asks someone else. You'll never know.
Oh
You'll
my
never
God,
know.
why not?
Why not? Exactly. Why do we need a... That should be the question, shouldn't it? Why not?
Yeah. Why are they called tens?
Oh my God, that's so deep. Why are they called tens? Why are they not called like rainbows or something? Like,
no, it should just be called potatoes. Like, how much does that cost?
I can't believe that like humans who probably came across potatoes before they came across the word 10 wouldn't just use the word potato for 10. Like, it's already there. It's already a word. It's already a thing. Let's see if there's like one more nasty comment on here. Oh, Melissa versus Troll? Uh-oh.
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 I haven't heard this yet. You're springing this on me live.
Are you going to be able to cope with it? Are you going to use like the processing system, or are you going to lash out?
No, the processing system is stupid. No, I'm kidding. I'll do it.
You've got 3 choices. Processing system,
failed.
stoicism, or outward aggression. That's your 3 choices. Or a mix of the 3.
I choose aggression. No,
okay.
No. I don't want to choose aggression. I'm going to try to choose the first one.
I choose aggression. So he says, funny how Melissa, no E, Melissa, described this theory from this scientist philosopher person. Quote, that's apparently what you said. You called them a scientist philosopher person. Sounds like something you would say. Like a new 2023 advanced discovery of the present, when actually there was a guy called Kant, with a K, exponing these theory already in the 18th century. God bless America, crying, laughing face. No hate, comma, just gave me a laugh. As always, love the content, love heart.
Oh, good. Oh, that's so sweet.
It's so nice that they were coming from a place of love.
I love him. No,
I love him too. He's so lovely.
I love it. No, that really is great. I think it's awesome that I assume he's talking about Heidegger.
Yeah, but it was our last episode of last season. Yeah,
Heidegger was absolutely responding to Kant. I mean, Kant. It was absolutely like a fundamental core part of being in time was a response to Kant. And so yeah, I mean, it incorporates Kant fully. But I think that's an interesting point. I mean, I didn't mean to ignore Kant, but I think it would be a longer discussion that I would have to prepare for to talk more about like how he incorporates that. But yeah, and I just love how you ended that comment. I really love that. That's not a troll by any means. That is a friend.
That's a friend, yeah, because what a friend will do is they'll say something that basically belittles you and tries to elevate themselves way above you, and will then say, much love, you keep going,
But he just said, and I mean, maybe he's, I don't think maybe he's talking down to me, but I don't even care. I love it. I love it. So thank you for whoever that is. I mean, and I'm not like you, like I don't have like all this content out there, and I don't spend a lot of time online. Like I am very non-online, and so it's still very new to me to like correspond with people through comments. So that was nice, and that was a very soft way to bring me into this. I thought you were gonna have someone like say something really nasty, and I was gonna have to use this adaptability model in real time. I don't want to know if people are saying nasty things. I really don't. It makes me like, I'd rather go through the world. The way I feel about it is that like, if if people are talking about me behind my back, I don't care because like it wasn't meant for me to hear. And I know it's not the same comparison with people like posting comments, but like if someone's gonna like anonymously comment, like I don't really care because like they don't sacrifice anything by being anonymous. So why would I sacrifice any part of myself to respond to it? I don't have the same disposition as you where like I can engage with trolls. I'm like way too sensitive. But go ahead.
No, that's totally fair. I don't really like to engage with trolls either, like in their playground. Like if you say that like the trolls domain is like the comment section where they can lurk anonymously or whatever, I'm not saying that's what that person was doing because obviously they're not on that level at all. But if you do have a real troll, there's no way in hell, like I've been sucked into it before and like writing the back on Twitter and stuff like that, and it goes nowhere and it just ruins your night and it makes you feel like you're in a conflict that you really don't, you like, without sounding arrogant, you are not, there's no reason why you should be dragged down to the level of that person. And so like why would you want to be in that? But I think I just take everything as a personal attack because I am out there in the public space and I have had malicious people on Twitter and Twitch attack me for no reason. Sometimes I read a comment like that when I just read it, I'm like, this guy's a fucking asshole. Like, this guy's definitely a horrible troll. Then I take a minute to be like, no, like, they're not. You're just, like, projecting past troll experiences. But yeah, I guess that does it for Pete versus Troll, Melissa versus Troll, and Melissa versus... Sorry,
Melissa versus Friend.
Melissa versus Friend, and...
Melissa meets new friend.
Melissa meets new friend on internet.
Makes new friend.
Philosophy friend.
Philosophy friend.
New philosophy friend. You can like when you have dinner with your husband tonight or whatever, you can be like, I made a new friend. I made a philosophy friend today. And you can
so be like, cool. Yeah, doesn't care. And that's honestly that's why we get along so well. But all right. Well, this was a good episode. This was this is our third episode. For only our third episode, this was pretty good.
That was a joke.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for listening and for continuing to comment. We always have we had a great, I think, discussion in the Discord this week that I think is always interesting to read and follow. Shout out to Jess, who always leaves my favorite comments and starts like great threads. It's always great. So anyways, that's all. Have a good week.
See you next time, everyone. Check out carrotcorner.com. All of your poker needs. That's a really dramatic plug.
/ Daily Wire. No, I'm kidding.
Not really.
I don't know why I find that funny. I'm the only one that finds that funny. Okay, bye.
Bye, guys.